Welcome to Pop and Lock. I'm Natalie Dowzicki.
And I'm Landry Ayers. I have been telling Natalie since this show began that there is one show that would be perfect for us to cover, and I finally got her to watch it. And this time, she actually enjoyed my suggestion. I think.
It's rare. It's rare.
It's true. Today, we are talking Veep. Here to discuss this eerily and infuriatingly accurate depiction of modern Beltway hijinks are federal policy analyst for the Tax Foundation, Alex Morishanu.
Hello.
And senior producer at Reason, Zach Weissmuller.
Hi.
All right, so we're all slightly ingrained in the DC life, and some of us are more ingrained than we want to be, honestly. But, watching this show, it was kind of nice just to see different ways we could be interpreting, our everyday lives here in DC. How is Veep about the hypocrisy of politics?
I mean, I think it's almost like the entire show. I mean, it's almost like it doesn't. No one instance sort of sticks out of somebody being a hypocrite, because I think that's just sort of the ambient level the show is just sort of constantly at. But yeah, I think it's just sort of a default level of, say one thing, do the other is just probably a premise behind like 80% of episodes in some way or another.
Yeah, it's almost hard to even call it hypocrisy, because it's more like there's no hard and fast principles. I mean, some of the characters have beliefs, but really they're just motivated by their political self-interest. And that's kind of the brilliance of the show to me, is that it's not really about anyone trying to achieve any particular policy or ideological agenda. It's just about kind of the psychology and the incentives that politicians face in DC.
I would be very curious then, particularly knowing where the show ends up. Spoiler alert, as always, if you've seen Veep, stop listening. Go and watch it. It's better than this podcast. I'll say that right now. I'm not afraid of doing that to our own show. Particularly with the character of like Richard Splett, one of my favorites, who ends up becoming president of the United States, despite the hesitation of some political fixers early on in the series. For a show that is as cynical as it is, to end on such a sort of optimistic note, somewhat, every show, regardless of their intent, puts forth some sort of belief about truth in the world that is embedded in how it operates. What does Veep believe in? What does it portray as the truth about politics, or whether it's Washington, D.C., or simply American government? What is the truth it believes in?
Yeah, I mean, I made a video for Reason on this topic a few years ago, because I was a huge fan of the show. I'm actually not in DC; I'm in LA, but so that's why it was like particularly interesting to me, because I am like immersed in the world of politics, and I know lots of people in DC. But I've worked a little bit in the entertainment industry. My wife works in the industry. So I'm always really interested in how Hollywood portrays DC. And in my piece, I compared it to a couple other attempts, The West Wing being one of the more famous ones. And then House of Cards was also popular at the time that Veep was. And my take on it was that The West Wing romanticized the president in particular, and politics in general, as these kind of noble statesmen who can kind of rise above the fray. And then inversely, House of Cards has a kind of dark romantic vision of politicians as these ingenious Machiavellians who will literally just murder people to move up in the ranks. And I think that there's some Machiavellianism in Veep as well, but it's weirdly like more grounded, even though the show has a level of absurdism to it. And so my ultimate take on Veep is that its worldview is basically overlapping with the Nobel Prize winning economist James Buchanan, who, was one of the creators of what's known as public choice theory, which can kind of be summarized as politics without romance. So politicians are just like any of the rest of us. They're motivated by a combination of self-interest and self-image, and kind of what they can get away with given the incentives that are facing them. So for that reason, I always thought Veep, out of at least those three and possibly any like Hollywood portrayal of Washington, D.C. is, among the top in terms of getting it right.
Yeah, I would agree a lot with what Zach said. I would say that the thing about Richard Splett becoming president at the end of the show that I think is is actually an appropriate sort of offset to the cynicism of the show, in that, like, I think the show's closing message is some level of sort of cosmic justice or whatnot, that like Selina is so ruthless in her pursuit of power that like she ultimately ends up with nothing. And I do love the gag, which I'd forgotten. They do a joke in the first episode about getting pushed out of the news cycle because Tom Hanks dies. I'd forgotten that was a joke in the first episode when I watched the show again. But I thought that ultimately, and then Richard Splett, he is sort of West Wing is a bit because he is a comic character, but like that he is somebody who is in politics for the right reasons, or for the sort of right reasons, and it's sort of public service minded individual. And I feel like he oddly sort of reminds me, I guess, of like Chester Arthur, who is, in my opinion, a very underrated president, because he's just like a like guy who was brought up through the spoil system of Gilded Age politics, and ended up vice president, and then Garfield gets shot and Arthur takes over, and Arthur ends up being the one who does civil service reform, which was Garfield's big promise, and ends up taking on the machine. So I guess that is a sort of an odd, I guess the closest thing to like a historical parallel I could think of. But that sort of thing does happen too.
I think that's the first ever Garfield and Chester Arthur drops that we've ever had on the show.
You win.
But I hope it's not the last.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, and it's it's telling. Splett kind of accidentally falls into it, and I think that that's consistent with Veep's worldview, in that if you're going to get somebody who is kind of civic minded and very intelligent, though very socially awkward at the same time, it's going to sort of happen by accident, because the way that the political system incentivizes certain behaviors and certain personalities, someone like Splett isn't necessarily going to rise up through the conventional route. He's going to kind of accidentally fall into the Oval Office.
Yeah, it's sort of a political Mr. Magoo situation.
Right.
It's interesting that you brought up, House of Cards and West Wing, and I think in preparation, Alex had written something about Parks and Rec, I believe, at one point, that I was thinking of those political compasses with the two axes, but if you were to do it about their like depiction of government, whether they are, benevolent or malevolent, and whether they are effectual versus ineffective, these shows, while they're not all about national politics, they do kind of fit into these four quadrants, where you have House of Cards that's really malevolent and selfish and self-serving, and they're highly effective and Machiavellian, like Zach had said. And then you have Parks and Rec, which is, very noble and public service oriented, but they really can't get anything done except for very minor things. And then West Wing is noble and very effective and rouses the public, and there's it's coded as very like successful and uniting by the big sweeping scores and the big very Sorkin, that's kind of his bread and butter. And then there's Veep, where there's a bunch of malevolent, selfish people but they are all too foolish to get anything actually done. That other than maybe a few of times they win office, they are never really successful. They are always still the fools in the show, which is definitely one thing that I think Iannucci, when he started Veep and the sort of shows it was based on, In the Loop and The Thick of It, over in the UK, that is definitely an aim that I see there.
Yeah, I thought that's why it was brilliant to set it in the VP office
Yeah.
as well, because it just makes it a little, lower stakes when they start off, as president. You can't necessarily have like a kind of bumbling climber. Like there is a sort of gravitas that immediately, you have to embrace, whereas they could really dig into just the pure politics and political incentives with that sort of I'm not going to say entirely useless, but at least the way it's portrayed in the show, fairly useless.
Go
office.
there.
Well, I think their choice.
Go there. Let's dig deep.
I think their choice of, like, for instance, setting this in like the VP office versus like the president also like helps them with dry humor, right? So because there's like an underlying understanding that's like, you made us a VP, that's like a great accomplishment, but like what do they actually do? So like there's almost like an inherent joke just in that setting. And I think this show does a really good job of like that dry humor that we've kind of been hinting at. And another thing that I think Alex had written down in his notes beforehand, but this is another show about politics that doesn't necessarily tell you flat out who's on what side. Like we get like glimpses of, like they support certain issues or they denounce others, but they never come out and straight up say, what party they're affiliated with. And, there's tension between Selina and the president, and there's a lot of back and forth. But I think that almost plays to their advantage because it makes both sides funny. Had it been like your like Hollywood elites attacking the right or being a criticism of the left, I don't think it would be as funny, just because it kind of wanted to make everyone look ridiculous, so that you didn't think deeper of like, oh, is this person or is this politician supposed to be a Republican or are they supposed to be a Democrat? And I think that enhanced the show. What do you guys think?
I think that that Selina is a Democrat, and also interestingly, Frank Underwood from House of Cards is also a Democrat. And I think that those were both smart choices because you have these Hollywood people who are Democrats writing about Democrats. So it sort of creates a neutral like canvas. Whereas if it's Hollywood liberals writing about Republicans, it suddenly becomes a commentary on like how dumb conservatives are, right, or whatever. So I thought that was, a smart move. But, to your point, she's a Democrat, but she's not really tied to any specific issue. Like she's so malleable. Like I know we all watched the abortion episode, which would be interesting to talk about because she expresses that she does have some political convictions in that episode, but it ultimately doesn't really matter. It's about, they literally chart out what number on the week chart, what trimester, can we like settle on to kind of calibrate between all of the different interest groups that are surrounding us and come up on this exact number. So that's like a perfect episode because it shows that kind of balancing act. She's literally has Gary kind of shepherd away one of the Planned Parenthood people so she doesn't encounter, a pro-life cardinal coming into her office. So
I think particularly in the abortion episode, the politics of the sort of political alignment in Veep is sort of, I guess, probably most accurate to like the 1970s in terms of where the two coalitions are. But like the Democrats still have, or I think I agree that Selina is probably a Democrat. Like on the whole, she follows more than she's got like the Families First bill and the Clean Jobs Initiative and stuff. So I think on the whole, it seems like that is the Democratic Party. But like, at the end of the show, famously, she like appeals to like the conservative wing, the like staunch social conservative wing of her party to ban gay marriage. And I think that is, part of how Veep sort of cheats for the audience, that like it creates political incentives for politicians on the show to compromise with sort of high emotion stakes issues that don't actually exist in reality. Like if you are a Democrat, you are running for president, you are pro-choice. Like if you are a Republican and you're running for president, you are pro-life. There is no, like, the political incentives align with having like a very clear, staunchly defined position. Whereas Veep, by messing with the coalitions, you can allow people to sort of waffle on these very high stakes issues, which I do think probably reflects thought processes on other things that just tend to not be as particularly sort of general politics consumption oriented. You know, something marginal like these specifics of how, I don't know, the H-1B visa program works or whatever. Something that is sort of very specific and not like a big headline screaming news.
Natalie, gonna flip the script here.
Okay, hit it.
As the only woman on this episode, how do you feel about the depiction of women in politics on the show? Whether it's Selina or it's Amy or it's...
Selina wouldn't like being asked the as a woman
Yeah,
question.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I only do this because Natalie wrote it down in our notes.
I did.
So she told me to do it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be like, speak for all women, Natalie.
Yeah. I'm not going to start my diatribe by saying, as a woman, I feel, but
I can't as a woman.
So there, I guess this is twofold. And this comes kind of to head in the abortion episode, right? Where they sit Selina down and they tell her like, okay, you need to like come out with a statement, and it should start with the, as a woman, like you should really lean into your womanness in this statement so that people like believe what you're saying, basically. And I mean, I found it troubling that she said, like, I think she's like, I can't identify as a woman. Like, people can't know that I'm a woman. Which I was like, well, wait a second. You're the VP. Do they not know this by now? But taking that aside and kind of looking more into it, I think in a way that Selina's character, and obviously like she's the leading woman in the show, is like she's angry, she's aggressive, she's like dysfunctional, right? She like can't get much done, which is funny because usually how women are portrayed for like in politics is more like they're cutthroat or they're too emotional, not in like an angry way, but she is almost portrayed to me as like having the personality of a male politician and like her cutthroat nature, which I thought was interesting. And then like I did some more research into this, why did they choose to have the VP be a woman? Because at the time that the show was made, we obviously didn't have a VP as a woman yet. And they weren't necessarily all that concerned about it being like Selina, her actress specifically, but they didn't want anyone, the show creators didn't want anyone to think they were trying to portray a VP that already like existed. So they didn't think that it would like, they didn't want you to think that like Selina was Dick Cheney, for example. They basically chose it so that you didn't think that they were trying to like portray former Vice President Biden or Dick Cheney or what have you. But I do think she is portrayed more like a male politician than most people perceive female politicians now. Like the stereotypes I was talking about them, being emotional or like not cut out to lead and that kind of stuff. None of that is evoked in the show, but I also think she is not willing to embrace her womanhood in order to for example, like win over voters. If she doesn't want people to know she's a woman, she's like acutely aware that like that's going to deter her ability to, be a politician or to gain support. But it's also, Amy is also like, during the testimony episode, they're asking Amy a bunch of questions on the data breach and the email to the bereaved parents. And they ask her like a question about, I forget exactly how it's phrased, like a question about money. And she responds, she's like, are you only asking me this because like I'm the woman on the panel and I don't have any expertise in this area? And I just thought there's a few times in there where it's like, they're very poignant parts that women are depicted as they're more so embracing like what a male politician would than what our stereotypes of female politicians are. Not that the stereotypes are correct, but they don't lean into those female politician stereotypes.
Right, because we're seeing everything from behind the scenes too, which is interesting. Whereas if we were seeing everything like from the opposite end, I think we would see more of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I would love to see Julia Louis-Dreyfus as like Spiro Agnew, though. That would be really, really interesting.
Yeah.
This Christmas.
You know, I have never seen this show before, as Landry already hinted at. And so I binge watched for like the last like 3 weeks, the whole show. And because I watched it, you know, after Trump had been president, some of the things I witnessed, I was like, man, they predicted the future. So I like researched into it, and they said the show creators were talking about how sometimes they'd sit around and they're trying to, you know, come up with different ideas for episodes, and they'd sit down and be like, what's the dumbest thing that could happen in politics? And then the show creator goes, they're doing stuff as in like the Trump administration and others and politicians during the show are doing stuff they couldn't even think about to invent for the show. And I'm kind of wondering how many times have you thought of Veep after something ridiculous has happened in the last, let's say, 5 years? How many times do you think it was like this? I'm living a real life Veep episode.
The big one is Nevada. 2020 election,
the recount?
of course.
I mean, I think like the Eagle is basically Rudy Giuliani. Like, is basically, I think what's happening. I think they predicted that. Also, the best, I think the most like Veep moment, especially, I guess this would be kind of sort of the end stinger scenes or whatever, very much. Actually, no, I think this would be in like a whole episode, is 4 Seasons Total Landscaping. I think that is like the most sort of like
yeah. Roll credits as Giuliani's starting the press conference.
Yes, absolutely. Like the whole episode is building up to like a big like tell-all press conference, and then the climax is we got the wrong 4 seasons and all these people show up. Credits roll. Absolutely. Or I could also see Selina stares into the eclipse and has to wear like eclipse sunglasses for like a week,
like an eye patch.
like she does when she gets her eye exam done, and she has all the bruises, and she has to wear the sunglasses when she goes to visit the naval ship on Thanksgiving. Like, it could be something like that, where she just has to wear big sunglasses because she stared into the sun.
Yeah, another Giuliani moment is him doing that press conference and just like sweating his makeup off the side of his face. I feel like that'd be a good
it would be Mike McClintock sweating his red mustache.
It would be like red dye.
Yeah, and I mean, it is interesting. Like, I was watching this as contemporaneously as the Trump moment was unfolding, and they really, like everyone else, were caught off guard by that. So there was, I think it was maybe in its second to last season when Trump started to rise, and I remember watching that season, and I thought it was just the weakest season because it was so out of step with like what was going on. I think Selina was out of power and just trying to like get her presidential library in order and stuff. And it was just kind of weak. And then they had a chance to come back, and I thought they brought it all back together. Another, behind the scenes aspect was that Armando Iannucci, the creator, had stepped away to do other projects. So they probably had to, reorganize the writing staff and so forth. But I did think they pulled it together for the last season, and they were able to start tapping into like that weird populist energy that was happening. Jonah starts to become, a potential candidate running on like math is bad because it was created by Muslims and stuff like that. And Selina, goes like, they pull out all the stops, and she just becomes like as depraved as possible, and throws all her friends under the bus. But I thought the final season really it was remarkable that they were able to kind of respond and rise to the occasion.
Well, I'd also read something after Trump was elected, they like had a serious like sit down with the writing team trying to decide if like people still thought politics was funny in terms of like them continuing the sitcom nature of the show. And if it was like almost too real that their like jokes weren't going to land anymore, which I thought was certainly not something they probably predicted when they first started the show. And they probably had to have a much more careful eye to like a lot of their dry humor in the last two seasons, partially just because as we were watching, you know, the Trump's presidency unfold and them kind of not being able to predict what Trump was going to do after, you know, they've already recorded and filmed these episodes. They wanted to make sure that nothing was like all that controversial in the sense that like it wouldn't be funny. I also read that they like took out a few jokes after like post filming, like some, and I guess in like post production like stages of episodes that were coming out as like Trump was making certain remarks. So I read this article that there was like some joke that was made about like a golden shower in one of the Veep episodes. And it was like right before it was like the episode was supposed to come out, like right around the time that this whole like locker room talk scandal with Trump came out. And they were like, okay, this is like not funny, like no longer something that like we should keep in. So I thought that certainly the show writers had a bit of a challenge in the later seasons to still stick like a landing with the show and like keep it relevant, but not lose, you know, the audience that they gained through all of this was for a sitcom audience and was for comedy, and it wasn't for like the seriousness of politics. No one was watching this show like as like a drama. It was entertainment. It was comedy.
Yeah, it would have been too on the nose, I think, for them to even include that joke, even if they weren't like, oh, it just wouldn't be as funny. And I think that arrives at that moment that Zach was talking about, which is, I think, that 6th season where she's out of power. That was when Trump was happening. So I think people were tired. They didn't want to think about politics. She was also, you know, there was that lull in the writing staff, and they're really lucky that they pulled it out for the 7th season as well as they did, because it could have easily ended so poorly at that moment after the 6th season. But I think at that point they were like, we can invest in the 7th. Yeah.
The way they made it work, I think, is that they didn't just make Selina into Trump or even like create a Trump-like character. They just sort of what they are so good at, which is to show you the incentives that these politicians face. And in this case, why are there incentives for populism? Well, it's because, you know, partly in our media environment, saying these things that get like a big rise out of a crowd, just that electrifying moment. You know, even in the earlier season, she accidentally like goes like hardline anti-immigration because she forgets like what her motto is, and so she she has the 3 R's and she forgets the last R, and the last R is repel. She just comes up with repel, and she's like, we got to repel all the immigrants out of here, and then she like gets like a big reaction. And I mean that's like very Trumpian in a way. It's like he just would throw stuff out there, and if something got a reaction, kind of like go with it. And so, you know, we were seeing the nature of presidential politics, especially like changing as the show was going on. And it's partly because I think, you know, the nature of how media is changing for some reason lends itself to populism.
That moment where you're talking about how politics was changing and that type of what could have been a gaffe or a, something that would have gone wrong can instead be something that people glom onto. It's people being like, I like Trump because he talks like a normal person, as opposed to some very slick politician. Whereas a few years before, you had Rick Perry do that exact thing in a presidential debate with the three agencies of government, and he forgets the last one.
That's probably what they were parodying. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it's especially because the way he did it was a perfect comedic gag. Like in the rule of three, he sets up one agency of government. He's like, I'm going to get rid of these three. There's this one, there's the second one, and he establishes a pattern. And then the third thing, he forgets. So it's like a punchline to a joke where they pull the rug out from under you. And he does that 3 times in the debate. So he establishes a pattern within the pattern. And on the third time, he just gives up early. So it was this perfect comedic moment that they were able to play off of. But in today's sort of political environment, they were right on the cusp where they could see that, because they could have very easily made that moment something that everyone laughed at Selina for, and her campaign, falls off and does terribly. But they were like, wait a minute. And I think this is one way that they were ahead of the curve and sort of seeing the signs of what was happening in politics, is they were like, wait, someone could glom onto that and be like, I like the way she did that. We're actually going to make that. And the twist of the episode is that it works for her in the same way that something that Donald Trump might say, people would be like, oh, he messed up in the, normal political sense, but we like that about him.
I mean, the way they really run with that in the final season is with Jonah, because he just he's really like the Trumpiest character
Jonah.
In the final season.
Through the whole show.
I mean,
I love him because he's the worst.
Yeah, exactly.
Which makes sense. That's exactly what we want. Him as a character to be, if he is the Trumpiest, like Zach said.
Yeah, like his signature issue at the beginning is abolishing daylight savings time, which is like, everyone loves it. It's so simple. And then, what you said about people would always talk about how Trump talked like a normal person, or, I mean, not a normal person, but I guess he didn't speak in, political lingo necessarily. Yeah. And that was Jonah's appeal is to the people of New Hampshire, where he was from, was he would just say the things people were thinking. So they really were able to adapt and kind of tap into the moment in an interesting way.
Yeah, I think the strongest parallel with Trump and Jonah is his slogan, I believe, is the outsider's insider, which is like very much the Trump pitch about being like, I know all these people, like I've donated to all of them, and I that is very sort of similar. I will say also on the subject of Veep in real life moments, another one has to be Rick Perry becoming director or becoming secretary of the department.
Yes, absolutely.
In that moment.
Oh my gosh. I forgot that was his job. I'm from Texas. He was my governor and I forgot. I think I just blocked it out. It was too traumatic for me.
Landry mentioned this, the Nevada episode. Nevada. I was sitting there and I was like, oh man, this is like teetering on the edge of PTSD from the last 2 months of 2020, which, 2020 had a great year. We all had a fantastic year at home.
Nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
But it was sitting there and I could just picture because she's video conferencing back and forth with Amy and was like, did you count the votes? And then I'm thinking of they're arguing over whether or not they voted for Selina and whether or not to count which vote. And I'm thinking of the hanging chads in 2000. And I'm like, oh, they really killed this one. Also because it was Nevada, because Nevada was a state that was in contention in 2020 and they had to do a recount for. So then I was like, I feel like the newscasters from 2020 probably could have, contributed to the real life seriousness of this episode.
And then they had there was the stop every vote.
Oh yeah.
Stop counting the votes, count every vote switch, which was happening simultaneously in different states during 2020. You've got like Philadelphia where they're like, stop counting, we're done. And then there's Nevada where they're like, we need to count all the votes, go. So these like conflicting messages are happening in different parts of the country, whereas on Veep they just happen to be happening right next to each other and then swapping.
But I think that was also true about like the national conversation. Like, because I remember on Wednesday after the election, a bunch of the Trump people who I followed were like, "Look, you can't drag this out. You can't just keep it going. You can't have recounts forever. I mean, And then like the next day they were like, "Well, you can't stop." Like, I did see that like immediate switch for a lot of people.
As people who are tangentially related to Beltway goings on, at the very least, who do you identify with as a part of the show? Even if you're not, on a campaign or working in an office, who's someone that if you were in their shoes, you'd be like, that's probably the kind of person that I would be. Flaws and all. Really read yourself to filth here. I'm going to say Natalie is our Sue, because if we didn't have Natalie on our team, we would just collapse underneath the weight of it all. She's the record keeper, and it's if anything goes wrong, we call Natalie, and we're like, what's on the schedule? She's like, it's this.
I would say I'm probably Sue, or occasionally Amy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, if you need someone to be like, I need you to go yell at this person and make sure that this gets done, like you would send Amy or something.
Yeah.
Be like, Natalie, can you make a phone call for us?
But I do want to give a little shout out to Gary, just because, he is the best character. I don't have much to stand on why I think that way. I just think it's so funny, like that he always is like the butt of every joke, or he always gets thrown under the bus, or like his job is, relatively pointless. He can't, Selina says herself that he is literally useless, which he's obviously not. But I just wanted to give some love for Gary. I'm definitely not Gary. It never will be Gary, but
I think I'm a little Gary.
You think so?
There's a little part of me that's just a little part of me that's Gary. There's also a little part of me that's Jonah.
Gary and Splet are really the only good-hearted characters in the show. Gary is he's just a total loyalist. He believes in Selina for some reason. He might be in love with her, but in some very strange, non-sexual way. And he just will do anything for her, and ultimately does take the ultimate fall for her. So he's like the martyr of the show.
Yeah. I always liked Kent, our awkward king. He is just so dry and it's I would view comparing myself to Kent as aspirational. I would like to be that good with numbers, of being I always wished I was a little bit better at math than I am, but I just his just sort of general demeanor and disinterest in I guess because he's constantly polling everything, he is obsessed with what is politically relevant, but he has no stake. He's just a guy. He's just a guy who's I just do the numbers and I just tell you what they say, And there are just so many good moments where he is taking everything literally and not reading the subtext that everybody else in the room is. But I do one of my favorite Kent moments is that Ben, it's in the Mother episode that we all watched. That when Ben says something to Selina to console her, and then Ken just sort of stares and goes, I recall you said those same words to me when my cat Fibonacci died. I found them very soothing. It's just I don't know. I just love
those Ken. Were written in a card to me.
Yes.
Yeah. I agree with that. I also love that he's a part of a biker gang, you find out at one point. An exclusively Spanish-speaking biker gang, too.
The one that I probably, have them relate to the most, just being part of the media, is there's the journalist who's always trailing Selina's campaign, and then interacting with Mike, and they have this like contentious relationship where he's always trying to get what's really going on, and Mike is just like badly spinning him. Like I enjoy like those little relationships that they portray, in that they need each other, and Mike is obviously like terrible at his job, and constantly like spills secrets that he's not supposed to. But yeah, I enjoy I enjoy that little interaction, just because of the dance between like the PR person and the journalist, where they're just constantly trying to like put things in the rosiest light possible, even when like it's clear everything's falling apart.
Yeah, I take it all back. I am 100% Mike McClintock. Now that I remember Mike, just a fool trying to keep it all together and make it seem like he has got so much under control and is so wise, but it's just like the scenes of him over time when he talks about like adopting the child from China, and they are going to get it, so he's redoing the basement, and then they aren't going to get it, so he turns it into a media room, and then they end up getting the child, so they have to move the bedroom into that tiny room, and he's like, oh, I gotta check for asbestos, I haven't done that yet. Like all of those things, I was like, that would be me if I was in that scenario.
Yeah, I feel like Mike is also kind of an underrated, as I wouldn't say he's sort of as sort of good-hearted as a Richard Splett, but it's like he isn't like nefarious. He is not particularly like scheming.
He's just a fool.
Yeah, he's just like a guy who's bad at his job, which I guess there is like a continuum, I guess, of sort of competence. I guess sort of to Landry's point at the beginning about the sort of like contrasting and sort of high competence and like high malevolence versus benevolence, that like on the show I think there's a pretty strong correlation with like semi-competence and like nefarious intent, that like Mike is too like clueless to be a schemer, so like that allows him.
He just wants to work in the NHL.
yeah.
And now for the time in the show where we get to share all of the other things that we've been enjoying with our time at home. This is Locked In. So, Alex, Zach, anything?
Yeah, I mean, this is... it feels like a lot of people are reading this book right now, but The Revolt of the Public by Martin Gurry is a really interesting book that is also does a lot to explain our moment. He's kind of he's a former CIA analyst who studied the way that media created various revolutions around the world, the Arab Spring, and contributed to the rise of Trump, and just the way that, with the kind of fall of the traditional gatekeepers, that there's an inability to keep keep information, locked down, and highly relevant in the era of COVID as well, when experts have put out guidance that's not always been 100%, and the public, sniffs it out right away, and it just kind of creates this cycle of distrust. So really interesting book, and recommend it to anyone who wants like a better understanding of what's going on right now, because I feel like it gave me some clarity.
I'm trying to think of like movies that I've watched recently that I like to go through. I guess with the Oscars last night, or 2 nights ago, how like I hadn't seen any of them, and evidently not a lot of other people did, given that it was like the lowest watched. And I've read a lot of takes about how sort of movies are increasingly stratified between like you have like your mega superhero Star Wars blockbuster and like weird indie movie, which I find unfortunate, because I think I like very much sort of middle band types of movies, like sort of buddy cop movies and stuff like that. So I guess a couple of movies that I like that are sort of in that middle range that people might not have might have heard of but not seen, or if you're like a movie buff, you've probably seen them. But like, big fan of Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which was Robert Downey Jr.'s comeback movie in like 2005. It's him and Val Kilmer, and it's like a noir LA comedy. Sort of like, if you like The Nice Guys, it's the same director as The Nice Guys. If you like The Nice Guys, you will also like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. It's great. He's like Robert Downey Jr. plays like a thief who sort of bumbles into an audition for some cop movie, and so he gets assigned to like work with a detective to like learn to like prepare for his part, and then they get caught up in crime and hijinks. Yeah, what else? Oh, I'm a big fan of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, The Last Stand, which came out in 2013, which was supposed to be his, like, I think, big comeback movie after he was governor. Did not do particularly well. But basically it's like a modern Western almost. He plays like a small town sheriff in Arizona, and there's like some drug lord is like escaped and is heading towards the border, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's town is the last town, between the fugitive and the border. And it's like it's Arnold Schwarzenegger doing a Clint Eastwood impression.
Oh my.
Which should it just as a concept be fantastic.
Right.
And I think it is. It's just like very over the top and ridiculous, especially the second half of the movie. But I have a very good time watching it. I've seen it like a bazillion times. It's just so fun.
So it's very Arnold Schwarzenegger if it's very over the top. That's just...
Yes.
That's his style.
Like, excuse you, Natalie. Put some respect on his name.
All right.
He is the actor known for the film Kindergarten Cop.
Yeah.
Actually, his favorite performance to me is Jingle All the Way.
Love it. Yep.
For me, the other stuff I've been doing, I started a new book this week called The Things We Do for Love. It is not World War II fiction. So I'm taking a World War II fiction break, but have no fear.
Wow.
The next one I
It's
read
a big moment.
will be World War II fiction. The problem was like I didn't reserve it at the library in time, and there was like a kerfuffle, and the schedule was off. Anyway, I also, I spent the last 3 weeks watching Veep. So I haven't watched much else. But I am hoping after seeing some of the Oscars stuff, I didn't actually watch the Oscars. I just watch people talk about the Oscars, like on Twitter. I do want to see The Father with Anthony Hopkins. I've heard good things, and I do want to get to watch Minari. Those two are high on my list. So hopefully by our next recording, I'll have feedback for both of those.
I finished Red Dead Redemption 2 for the PlayStation 4. It was a phenomenal story. I loved it. Had a great time. I think it's an amazing game. If you're at all interested in cowboys or anything like that, I think you should play Red Dead Redemption 2. And I needed another game to play after that, so I just started The Last of Us, which is, comes highly recommended. They're going to make it, I believe it's an HBO series with Pedro Pascal in the lead role. Great story so far. Harder than I thought it was going to be. I had to switch to easy mode, which I do not do.
Wow.
I do not do proudly, but I thought I could do normal. I couldn't. I think I'd been playing too much like cowboy games and thought I could just run and gun through it. But no, you have to be sneaky. And I also started reading Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which is a really, really great book. I think Julian Sanchez actually recommended it on a previous episode of Pop and Lock, so go back and find that one, because I wouldn't be able to summarize what's going on in it for you so far, because I still don't really know. But I think he did, so maybe go back and listen to that if you're curious about what the book's about. But it is very well written. And I also am going to start Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, a classic sort of Western epic novel that I'm very, very excited to read. Thanks for listening. As always, the best way to get more Pop and Lock related content and to connect with us is to follow us on Twitter. You can find us at the handle @PopandLockPod. That's Pop, the letter N, Lock with an E like the philosopher, Pod. Make sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We look forward to unraveling your favorite show or movie next time. Pop and Lock is produced by me, Landry Ayres, as a project of libertarianism.org. To learn more, visit us on the web at www.libertarianism.org.